military and/or Ba'ath Party supporters of Saddam Hussein. The target last night in Baghdad was hit by a combination of Tomahawk cruise missiles coming from both the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, and also 117 stealth bombers. Here's Ari Fleischer live at the White House, the press spokesman.
Good afternoon. I would like to give you a report on the President's Day and then take whatever questions may be on your mind. The President began today when he received a 6 o'clock phone call from his National Security Advisor providing him with an overnight update on events in Iraq. The President arrived at the Oval Office at 6:55. Upon arrival, he later had his intelligence briefing, followed by an FBI briefing. He met with the Secretary of Defense. As we speak, he is having lunch with the Vice President. He will convene a cabinet meeting later today at which the President will welcome the pool. The President, at the cabinet meeting, will discuss the developments in Iraq, remind the cabinet of the importance of this mission of disarming Saddam Hussein. And he will also, on the domestic front, remind cabinet secretaries of the importance of pushing ahead with a busy and important domestic agenda, even in the middle of international events. Tonight, the President will meet with the President of Cameroon in the Oval Office, and he will dinner with the President of Cameroon. Before I take your questions, there's one item I would like to point out to you. The President would like to thank the growing number of nations that are joining the coalition of the willing to disarm Saddam Hussein. As of today, there are more than 35 countries currently committed to the coalition, and that number is growing. Contributions from nations include direct military participation, logistical, intelligence, and political support, specialized chemical and biological response teams, overflight rights, and humanitarian and other aid. Nations include, and this is just a partial list, Australia, Bulgaria, Hungary, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Spain, Turkey, United Kingdom. Turkey, of course, today in their parliament voted to grant overflight rights to the United States and to the coalition. It's no accident that many members of this coalition recently escaped from tyranny and oppression, and they understand what is at stake in bringing freedom and liberation to the Iraqi people as the mission of disarmament continues. All told, the population of the coalition of the willing is approximately 1.18 billion people around the world. The coalition countries have a combined GDP of approximately $21.7 trillion. Every major race, religion, and ethnic group in the world is represented. The coalition includes nations from every continent on the globe, and for this, the President is grateful. And I'm happy to take your questions. Ron?
Has Saddam Hussein or any of his leadership been killed or captured?
Any questions dealing with anything operational will, as was the routine in 1991, has been made clear on many occasions, be addressed by the Pentagon, not by the White House. Helen?
Is there any indication that Saddam Hussein will accept exile, and is that offer still on the table?
We continue to hope that Saddam Hussein will leave Iraq. We continue to hope that Iraqi generals will not follow orders. It is not too late for them to do that. It is very important that the President has said that Iraqi generals and Iraqi troops lay down their arms and not engage in combat. This is not their battle. This is not their war. This is a war to disarm the Iraqi regime from its weapons of mass destruction. It would be a welcome event if Saddam Hussein were still to flee.
Was the mission a success in general terms?
Ron, here in the very early days, the earliest hours of the disarmament mission, I'm not going to provide a play-by-play coverage of it. The President has every confidence, as the American people do, in the men and women of our military to achieve their objective, which is to disarm the Iraqi regime. He has every confidence that will be done, but I'm just not, as a general matter of principle, going to provide daily, minutely TikTok like that. But when I say the President has every confidence, it's for good reason. Bill?
You've emphasized the support that the coalition is getting, but there's been substantial criticism as well, particularly from President Putin of Russia. What's your response?
Well, again, the President is very gratified by the growing list of nations that support the coalition's efforts. The differences that the President has had and the United States has with a few other nations are well known. There's nothing new to that. The President understands and respects the opinions of leaders like President Putin. Nevertheless, that will not deter the United States and the coalition of the willing from disarming the Iraqi regime.
Going to damage U.S.-Russian relations?
No, I think that in the many conversations that President Bush has had with President Putin, the two of them have stressed that while on this issue they disagree about whether the use of force is appropriate to disarm Saddam Hussein, relations between the United States and Russia are too important for anybody to let them be damaged. The President doesn't believe they will be. No. Campbell?
All right, you noted that Turkey had granted overflight rights. What did we offer Turkey in exchange for overflight rights? And Turkish troops are now moving into northern Iraq. Are they working with...
We're going to cut away from that briefing because Jim Axelrod has some news along the Iraq-Kuwait border with the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division. Come in, Jim.
Baba Booey, you idiot.
We know that Jim Axelrod, we don't quite know what that was. He's in the process of putting on his chemical suit because at least the soldiers in his area have been ordered to do so. That doesn't necessarily mean anything is happening. It sounds for all the world like a precautionary measure. Let's try again for Jim Axelrod. Jim, are you there? Well, I think we've lost the audio on Jim Axelrod, but at any rate, the 3rd Infantry Division, which has been pouring artillery fire into Iraq over about the last hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, at least some of the troops have been told to get into their chemical protective gear. I repeat for emphasis, that does not necessarily mean anything is happening. It's the kind of thing that a prudent commander would do under the present circumstances in which the ground war has begun. Scott Pelley is in another location, which we're not going to tell you exactly where for security reasons, along the Kuwaiti-Iraq border. And Scott, have the helicopter attacks into Iraq been continuing, or has the lull sort of settled in?
No lull, Dan. The attacks have been continuing, and the artillery barrages have now been joined by an air campaign. A number of aircraft have been dropping large bombs in the area right behind me. I don't hear any at the moment, but there have been very loud concussions that have shaken our position and shaken our equipment here on the border. I do not hear the artillery barrage that we've been listening to for about 45 minutes. That seems to have subsided. There's been an air campaign going on. Again, we are right on the border of Iraq. We can't say exactly where for operational security reasons, but there has been a great deal happening here over the last couple of hours, including the helicopter attacks that you mentioned earlier, when we saw at least 2 attack helicopters launching Hellfire missiles on Iraqi positions. At the moment, for the first time in about 45 minutes to an hour, it's a little bit quieter than it has been. So for the moment, there does appear to be a lull, Dan, but at the rate things have been going, I would expect that this is the kind of thing we're going to be seeing throughout the Iraqi night.
Scott, do you have your gas mask with you? Do you have your chem suit with you?
We do, Dan. We all have our gas masks and our chem suits. We've been trained in their use, and they're standing by at our feet should we need them.
I just want you to keep them handy because we have a report from Jim Axelrod with at least 1 unit of the 3rd Infantry Division. They've been told to put theirs on, I believe, strictly as a precautionary measure. Now, bulletin material out of Baghdad, make of this what you will, and we do not have the picture, at least not yet. Iraqi television is showing, once again, a man allegedly, supposedly, and reportedly to be Saddam Hussein in military uniform. You recall that the man believed to be Saddam Hussein was seen last night in military uniform, been seen again today in military uniform, chairing what was called a cabinet meeting. Now, this came in at about 12:36 Eastern time today. We've been in the process of checking and double-checking it, and it does appear that Saddam Hussein, or someone who looks remarkably like him, has been seen in military uniform chairing a cabinet meeting. Now, it's important to keep following this because there's a lack of communication has been apparent in the last 12 to 14 hours, lack of communication from Baghdad to the field. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that one of the early goals of decapitating, cutting off Saddam Hussein and his main leaders from his leaders in the field has been accomplished, but it does raise the question. Are they holding back bombing Baghdad now in hopes that the leadership is finished? There have been no additional attacks on Baghdad since the ones last night. this is not a conclusion, it is to ask the question. These are the questions in the air as we return to the White House. Well, this is a live picture of Baghdad. As this is a live shot, it's now Baghdad time, what, about 9 o'clock at night in Baghdad. People are staying inside their houses. Keep in mind that the U.S. air attacks in general, we're talking about some big attack, this was not the case last night, are likely to occur in the very early morning hours because the U.S. wants to keep down civilian casualties, and of course there are fewer people out and around the city in the wee hours of the early morning than would be at other times. Now, in the case of the attack last night, they saw a target of opportunity. They just hit it when they thought they had the best time. Now, we want to emphasize to you that our coverage is continuing live here on CBS News. For those of you who are expecting to see the basketball, it's available on ESPN. We return now to the Ari Fleischer briefing at the White House in which he's answering questions from the press corps.
The interview that Saddam Hussein did with CBS News, he was asked if he would take this step, and he said he would not, that the Iraqi regime does not burn its own oil wells. Clearly, we have some evidence already this morning in a small number of cases to the contrary, which is a reminder of what this war is about, the very fact that Saddam Hussein will lie. And the issue is his lies about his possession of weapons of mass destruction. World energy supplies are more than adequate to compensate for any disruption these acts may cause. Saudi Arabia and other major energy suppliers have increased production, and their exports are proceeding normally in this regard.
And on the issue of
we're going
reconstruction costs,
dip in here again. Dateline Kuwait, the first reported combat engagement of the United States war with Iraq on Iraqi soil came apparently when a patrol of light armored vehicles from the Marine 1st Division came across 2 Iraqi armored personnel carriers. South, it says here, of the border with Iraq. Now, if it's south of the border of Iraq, that would mean in Kuwait. So there's some dispute as to whether it happened in Kuwait or in Iraq. But this is the first report we've had confirmed of U.S. Marines being in combat action on the ground. So what you have here, you have the Iraqis following up the U.S. raid on Baghdad last night, not on Baghdad as a whole, on that specific target last night. The Iraqis responding by firing at least 3 missiles. We don't know whether they were Al-Samud's. That's believed what they were, but they could have been something else. All 3 of them, well, at least 1, probably 2, knocked out by U.S. Patriot missile defense systems, the 3rd falling harmlessly in the general area of some U.S. Marines. Then you had, as Scott Pelley on the scene broke the news and reported on CBS News, tremendous helicopter attacks along the Kuwait-Iraqi border, followed by U.S. 3rd Infantry Division artillery barrages across that border. Jim Axelrod, who's with the 3rd Infantry Division, this just in, it has been deployed across the border. Let me repeat that for emphasis. Jim Axelrod, CBS News correspondent, embedded with the 3rd Infantry Division, says the 3rd Infantry has been deployed across the border. For what purpose, in what numbers, and for how long, we do not know. Buck Kernan, what's the significance of this? Sounds pretty significant to me.
Yeah, it sounds to me like they've started the initial movement of the ground forces toward their initial objectives.
And now let's go to the map and try to bring people up to date as much as we can on what that would mean. That the idea is, at least eventually, for a massive ground offensive to pour out of Kuwait in roughly 3 directions, right?
Correct.
One would be over in the general direction of Basra in hopes of taking Basra. One would be to pierce right on up to the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, what used to be called the Mesopotamia Valley, right in here. The 3rd would be more over here in the direction of Al-Nasiriyah. We mentioned before it's on the Euphrates River, roughly in this area. All of this area pretty much dominated by the Shiite wing of Islam, the central part of the country by the Sunni wing. And I made a mistake earlier, and I hope I can be forgiven for this. The Kurds of the northern western part of the country, they are Islamic, they are Muslim, they're a mixture of Sunni and Shiite wings, if you will, but ethnically, they are different from the Sunnis and the Shiites in the bottom of the country. It's awfully hard for Americans to follow this, but it speaks to the immense, complicated ethnic and religious makeup of the country. But in terms of what's happening now, the 3rd Infantry Division has crossed over into Iraq. And General Kernan, you think this signals it's probably, we don't know, probably the first edge of the wedge for a major ground invasion?
It sounds like it. I mean, if they've been given the order to proceed into Iraq, they've got some intermediate objectives that have already been identified. They'll isolate and cordon off those forces in and around Basra and move to the northwest, and based on the missions that have been assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division. I might also comment about the Marines. What you may have found there was some forward observers from the Iraqis that were there, possibly trying to target U.S. forces for those Scud or missile attacks, and the Marines may have found them out there and engaged them.
Engage them means to destroy them, of course.
Correct.
We have U.S. Marines in action now on the ground, U.S. 3rd Infantry, regular infantry division soldiers crossing over the border of Kuwait and Iraq. Some of the oil wells have been set on fire in the general southern Basra area of the country. Ari Fleischer, the White House spokesman, pointing out that Saddam Hussein had told CBS News that he would not set afire any of his oil fields. Fleischer using this as what he said was an example of how Saddam Hussein lies. Now, we've had this report that Saddam Hussein has appeared on Iraqi television again recently, or at least someone posing as Saddam Hussein. Sky News reporter David Chater was just on the phone with us, and we didn't get to him quite quickly enough. We'll try to raise him up again in a moment. Chater is our correspondent in Baghdad through our affiliated international partner of Sky. Now, Cynthia Bowers is right now aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Persian Gulf. Cynthia's report was subject to military review. Cynthia.
Dan, since early morning until now, there has been a steady, fairly continuous stream of fighter jets being catapulted from the deck of this aircraft carrier, among them the F-14 Tomcats, the F-18 Hornets and Super Hornets, and the S-3 Vikings. That's the tanker planes that enable that mid-air refueling. All are flying loaded, that is, with a full array of missiles and bombs, including that powerful GPS-guided JDAM, which can penetrate concrete bunkers. But the interesting thing has been that most of these jets have been returning to the carrier with their bombs still attached. This, though, they are now, they say, flying under the aegis of Operation Iraqi Freedom. The pilots say so far they have been primarily conducting the same missions that they've been doing for months, and that is patrolling the Iraqi no-fly zone. However, Dan, some pilots did tell me that they have seen oil fires from their planes, and this is the first time that they've ever seen oil fires. We are being told that the fighter jets are being flown in what's called surge operations. That is near round-the-clock flying. Pilots are flying several missions as part of an effort to get them ready for the aerial assault. So you could call this a dress rehearsal of sorts. Also, here on the Lincoln, we're quartered. We're sandwiched between the flight deck and a bomb-making factory below. And contrary to what we thought, there's not much bomb assembly underway even now. That's because we're told that the bombs have been assembled enough to last for a while. But even so, more are being brought on board the USS Lincoln tomorrow as part of a replenishment at sea. That's a supply ship will pull alongside the USS Lincoln and offload, among other things, more bombs. So that, to me, is a couple of indications that the Navy fighters are getting ready to become part of the assault on Iraq. Dan?
Cynthia Bowers with a live report from the aircraft carrier and the aircraft carrier group. Keep in mind that no carrier just sits out there alone, although it may look that way, that there's a huge armada, including submarines and air cover, when a big vessel like one of those aircraft carriers, which may have aboard 10, 12, 13,000 people. Let's pause and bring you up to date. Saddam Hussein reportedly has appeared on camera in Baghdad again. We show you a live picture of Baghdad. The city is quiet. We do not have the picture, but it's reported that someone believed to be Saddam Hussein has appeared again within the last hour at what was said to be a cabinet meeting in Iraq. Now, there's much unknown as to whether Saddam Hussein was in the bunker area hit in the first raid by U.S. cruise missiles and F-117 stealth bombers last night or not, but there's a growing indication that perhaps he either wasn't there or that he was not eliminated. No one can be certain that the people that in the two appearances on Iraqi television are in fact Saddam Hussein, but it is widely believed that it is he who is appearing on television. There's always the possibility, underline the word, possibility, that one of his many doubles are making these appearances, but about that we'll just have to sort of stay tuned. U.S. Marine forces have been in combat on the ground. Unclear whether it's across the border inside Iraq or, as we believe, south of the Iraqi border in Kuwait, possibly some Iraqi forces trying to target missile sites or running some sort of probes of their own. The Marines engaged them on the ground. The U.S. 3rd Infantry Division is reported, number one, Jim Axelrod, which we can't get up at the moment, but he first reported that he and the 3rd Infantry troops that he was with had been told to get into their chemical protective suits, and they did that. Then it was reported that they had moved across the border, and the 3rd Infantry Division is now operating inside Iraq. Helicopter attacks, Scott Pelley, about mid-morning, and reported helicopter attacks and showed them to us. We'll show you those pictures as we go along. Tremendous explosions from the helicopter weaponry hitting inside Iraq, followed by artillery barrages. These are some of the pictures of the helicopter attacks. Keep in mind that when you're going to have a large infantry force, like the 3rd Infantry Division go, there are forces that prepare the way. Apache helicopters go ahead. Basically, these Apache helicopters are very effective tank killers, but they can knock out other positions. Then that's followed by artillery. And get in mind, for those of you who've never seen it or need a reminding, the artillery sort of walks ahead of the infantry, hitting ahead of where the infantry is going to go. So you have helicopter attacks pretty far out, artillery coming in behind that, and then the 3rd Infantry Division moving into Iraq. I want to go to the map and show you what the plan has been. Whether the plan holds or not, as we cut away from the live picture, not live picture, tape picture of the helicopter and artillery attacks along the border, preparing the way for the infantry. In Kuwait, the two main ground operations would be the U.S. Marine 1st Expeditionary Force, which might be going into southern Iraq at some point and try to secure Basra, the big port city, and also the oil fields in this area. The 3rd Infantry Division, which is now crossed over in this border area. Some elements of it may be going up into the Tigris River here, the Euphrates here, the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. The idea is hopefully to hide it a little right up to at least the outskirts of Baghdad. Now, you are watching continuing CBS News coverage of America at War. Dan Rather at CBS News World Headquarters in New York. Things are developing very quickly. It is not yet certain, but it appears that the battle plan, which at one time was to be led by an enormous U.S. aerial assault and then followed on almost immediately, certainly quickly behind it, by a big ground assault, may have been turned on its head, a case of the cart being put in front of the horse, if you will. There's some reasons for that. Hold on just a moment. This just in. Air raid sirens heard in Baghdad. Let's switch to our live picture of Baghdad. Let's see if we hear anything in Baghdad.